Okay, we just did basic skills for crazy numbers, right? Simplifying, adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. Now we are going to solve equations. So we are on the section 9.6, page 45, to solve radical equations. So before we started, then let's compare them with algebra we have learned, right? So to solve equations, usually we do what? We will get the variable by itself. Right? We did that. And to solve radical equations, what do? We would do the same thing. Get the variable by itself. Okay? So, like before, we have 5x plus 2 equals 7, right? We will get x by itself by removing 2 first, then 5x equals 5, then x is 1, right? So, now we have what? Like this. 5x plus 2 equals 7. Then we have this one, 5x plus 1 equals 7. So we want to get just x by itself. Get rid of all the 2 and 5 here, 1 and 5 here. How we are going to do that? Okay, so what we wanted to do is, like here, we get rid of everything else besides x, right? So we will get x on one side, number on the other side. Then finally get x by itself. So same thing. Let's write down the steps, how we are going to do that. So what we do is, we just want to get those things with radicals on one side. So what we do is, we will isolate the radical, okay, on one side of equation. Like that, right? Then for here, you just isolate the x. But for radicals, since it's inside the radical symbols, then we have to get rid of that radical symbol. So what do? We do this way. We will raise each side, okay, of the equation to a power, okay, because radicals are opposite of the exponents, right? The power. So then power is what? The index of the radical. Let's see how it works. Then we simplify. Okay, then we will do what? We will solve the equation afterwards. We will solve the resulting equation. So usually for our class, either first degree or second degree. Okay, second degree would be what? Quadratic equation. First degree would be what? Linear equation. Then after that, you check. Okay, and when you check, it's important you have to do it against the original equation. Remember doing that, okay? When you check, you need to against the original equation. Okay, so let's see some examples, then follow the steps as such. Okay, so you look at if we have this one, square root of x is 7, right? Square root of x, equals -3, or just start from simple one first. Okay, square root of 2x is 4. Then what's our x? Right? For the square root. Then for the cube root, then let's see how we are going to do it. So we have cube root x equals 3, or we have cube root of x if it's a negative number, or if we have this situation as such. Look at the square root. You might have positive number or you have negative number, right? So for the first one, guess. Let's just guess. What do you think? What x is? Take a square root, will be 7. Then you know it's 49, right? Because square root of 49 is 7. However, if it gets complicated, then we will have to do something else, like below you have what? 3x minus. It gets complicated, right? So we want to learn the right process, right thinking to always get answers. So what we wanted to do is, right? So this is a square root of 7. Then you wanted to get rid of square root. Then you do what? Do the opposite. Okay? You will raise the power, because it's square root, you will raise 2 power. Okay? If you do one side, you need to do another side, right? Then square root of 2, you times twice, become x squared, take a root, become x. That's you. Then you can cancel out that. Then end up x is what? 49. That's how you find your answer, that way. Right? Let's look at this one. What happened? Anything take a square root, this symbol, you will always what? Positive number or doesn't exist, right? So for this one, if x is 9, right? Then square root of 9 is 3, not -3, right? If x is -9, then -9 take a square root, that will be what? It doesn't exist. So it doesn't matter inside it's positive or negative. It will never be negative number. It will be what? Either positive number or doesn't exist. Right? So it will never be a negative number. So for the even root, then you cannot have a negative number as a result, because a negative number times twice would be a positive number. If it happens inside it's a negative number, you cannot take a square root with it, right? So what happened? How you are going to answer this question? You will say what? No solution, or doesn't exist. Right? So same thing for this one. Okay? And what happened? Same thing. No solution or doesn't exist. Right? No such a thing. You can take a square root, become a negative number. So you don't have to go further. Then for this one, see, guess. If we guess, What's x? Something, take a square for 4, 16 inside, right? So x has to be what? 8, right? Then we just follow the steps. You will find the answer. So radical is already by itself. Then we want to get rid of this radical symbol. We have to do the what? The opposite. So the opposite is what? Take a square, right? If you take a square, then twice, that would be what? 2x equals 16. Then you solve your x by dividing by 2. X is 8. Okay, you solve the resulting equation. Then you check. Yes, it works. So make sure you always check. Okay, always check. 2 things definitely you always need to check. One is what? Fractions, because denominator cannot be 0. Okay, and for radicals, because what? Inside the square even root, right? Inside the even root has to be what? Cannot be a negative number. That's the issue for the radicals. Okay? Same thing as fractions, denominator cannot be 0. Okay? So those are even roots. So if you have radicals by itself on one side, that's how you manage. Okay? So if you have R root, so what do you think? Same thing, you follow. Cube root. Then you need to do what? You need to take a cube that way. So if you do that, then you can isolate x, get x by itself. So x is what? 27, right? Okay, if you have negative x for the cube root, it's negative 3. So can you have a negative number inside of the R roots? Except the even roots. So you do the 3 times, then what do we get? We will have those cancel out. X is what? Negative 27, right? Same thing, if you have cube root of x, then it's negative 2. What do you think the answer is? Negative 8, right? Then how do you get that? So you take a cube, so get x by itself, isolate your x, so you get x is what? Negative 8. So what you need to do is you need to isolate the radical on one side. Okay? Then raise the power on each side, then simplify it. Okay, solve it. Okay. However, sometimes you will have a situation like this. Then you will have something strange thing happen, it will not work. Then we call it extraneous. Okay? So that means you do everything right. However, you get an extra answer, which is not right. Okay? So you need to do always check all the solutions. Okay? To the even radicals. For the R radicals, usually you should be okay. Right? If you look at this example, okay, so if you have square root of plus 2 equals 0. if you do the same thing as isolate x, get a radical by itself, you're minus 2, right? Square root of x is negative 2. Then you know you shouldn't have any answer, no solutions. However, if you made a mistake, you say, okay, I take a square, then you have what? X equals 4. If so, then you plug in. Square root of 4 is 2. 2 plus 2 is 4, not 0 anymore. So this one is what? Extraneous. So your x is what? No solution. Okay? You can just stop right here at this point because square root of x cannot be negative. If you can see it right away, you can stop right there. But if sometimes situation gets complicated, you may not see it right away. Then for even roots, make sure you always check for the extraneous solution. Okay, so let's take a look for those. If you have 3x minus 2 equals 5. So square root equals 5. That's fine, right? If it's negative, then you don't have to do it because it shouldn't happen. So for this one, how should you do? So you want to get x by itself, get rid of the radical symbol. We have to eliminate this by doing the opposite, take a square, right? Then this will cancel out. Then what will we have? We have 3x minus 2 equals what? 25. So we will solve the equation. This one is what? First degree, so it's a linear equation, right? So you add 2, so 3x equals what? 27. Your x is what? 7, right? No, 9, right? Then we have to decide, can I circle the answer? You need to check. So if you don't check on your test, then you lose some points because you didn't verify, right? Because the extraneous solutions may happen, okay? Then you check. You have to check against the original. So you have 3 times 9 minus 2. If you do that, can you get a 5? So 3 times 9, 27 minus 2, 25, square root of 5. 25 is 5. It's correct. So you can circle the answer. Right? Okay, then let's see next one. If you have 9x minus 2 minus 2x equals 0. How should we start? We have to get the x by itself inside the radical. Then we have to take a square to do that. Then we have to move everything else away first, right? So remember, you need to do what? Isolate the radical on one side of equation first. For this one, you have to do that, right? So you can get x by itself. Then, to get rid of the crazy thing, radicals, what do? You take a square, right? So this goes away. This goes away. So what do we have? So we have 9x minus 2 times twice. That's the root. Becomes what? 4x squared, right? What kind of equations we have now? It's a second degree, right? So that would be your quadratic equation. Not in standard form yet, but it is a quadratic equation. Okay? So either linear equation or a quadratic equation. How do we solve the quadratic equation? You have to write it in standard form, right? Because x squared is here, so I move everything to this side. That will be easier. Right? That's why we said this class, mainly we just learn one thing, solving quadratic equations. So for rational equations, fractions, right? Polynomials in fraction form, or the radical equations, we will still what? Try to solve quadratic equations, right? Then, how many terms we have? Trinomial. Leading coefficient is now 1. Then you need to use AC method. Okay? We are not going to repeat those. You need to do it yourself. Okay? So x times 4x squared, negative 2 times negative 1 is 2. The middle term here will be negative 8x. Here will be negative 1x. Added together is negative 9x. Right? So we break down to the smaller units, and each unit can be what? A 0. So this one, x is 2, or you solve this linear equation, x is 1/4. Then, how do we know it's working? You have to plug in. For sure, you have to check. Okay, 2 times 9, 18 minus 2, 16. So square root of 16 is 4. Then 4 minus 2 times 2 is 4, is 0. Yes, this one is working. Okay, how about the quarter one? Let's see if it's working as well. So we need to check. That's why sometimes it's not obvious. Then you want to make sure it's working. So if you plug in, will be what? 9 times quarter minus 2. We are checking, right? So minus 2 times quarter, is that 0? We have to check. So 9 times 1/4 is what? 9/4, right? Minus 2, take a square, which is what? And how do you do your fraction? You use the same denominator, right? It's 4. Then that will be 1/4. You take a square root, that will be what? 1/2. Then 1/2 minus this, 2 times 1/4, put 1 underneath, cross cancel, is 1/2. Is that 0? Yes. Right? So you need to check. So this one works as well. Before you circle it, make sure you check it. Okay? So, then this one, cube root of a minus 5 plus 2 equals 1. Right? So instead of square root, we are doing what? A cube root. But you do the same way. So how should we start? Get the radicals by itself, right? Then you can get rid of the cover, the crazy thing, right? If it's by itself, negative 1, right? If it's by itself, then you can get rid of the covered things only inside, so you can just handle it directly, right? So, can cube root be a negative number? Okay, so you do the opposite, take 3 times instead. Then if you cube root, take 3 times, then the root is itself be what? A minus 5, right? Then you can solve it, plus 5, then a is what? 4. Then we check. 4 minus 5 is what? -1. Cube root of -1 is what? -1. Plus 2 is 1. Right? So it's okay. So usually, you don't need to check for the cube root, for the R roots. Usually, if you do it right, it should be okay. You will not have extraneous conditions, not like even roots. For sure, you need to check. Okay? So if you have 9 plus x equals x plus 3, how should we start? Get rid of radicals. But it's already by itself. You can just do that. Right? Those cancel out. That will be what? 9 plus x equals x plus 3. Take a square, right? Don't give me x plus 9 here. X plus 3 take square. You need to do what? The FOIL. It will be trinomial plus. Okay? Remember that. So, then we move everything to that side. Minus x minus 9. Minus 9 x. So 0 will be what? X squared plus 5x. Right? It's a binomial. How can you break down a binomial? Usually you follow the formulas. However, you always do what first? GCF, right? So you take a GCF out. Go 0. You have two parts, right? By 0 product property, x can be 0 or x plus 5 can be 0. So this one, x is what? -5. Then we need to check if we can circle the answers. Okay? So for this one, you need to bring. So that's why we don't want to overriding original. You need to do it against the original. So it's 9 plus 0 equals 0 plus 3. That was original, right? So square root of 9 is that 3? We are checking. Yes. So we can circle this answer. Right? Then let's take a look at this one. Check. So original is what? 9 plus -5. Right? Is that same thing as -5 plus 3? We are checking. So that would be what? 4. That would be what? 2. But this side would be what? -2. They are not the same. So this one, you cannot circle it. Actually, it's a what? An extraneous solution. Right? So for even roots and even radical equations, make sure you check. Okay? So, let's see next one. Square root of 2m minus 3 equals what? 3 minus m. Right? So, how should we start? We need to take a square root. Usually we should leave the original equation alone because we are going back to check, right? So when we take a square, we write it again. Okay? So let's see. Let's take a square. That will be 2m minus 3. This take a square, do FOIL. Okay, don't give me this. Don't do that. Right? So you will have minus what? 6m. You do your FOIL. Should be this one. Then m squared is this side. I'm going to move everything to this side. It's a quadratic equation, right? Because it's a square. So those cancel out. I have 0 and 6 minus 4 minus 8m plus what? M squared. Is that right? Okay, so we will write what? Wait, that's 12. Okay, so we will write m squared minus am plus 12 equals 0. Then trinomial leading coefficient is 1. I can just write it, mm there. For two numbers, multiply together is 12. Add together is negative 8, right? So I will have what? M6 equals 0, or what? M minus 2 is 0. Then what we do? M is 6, M is what? 2. Then make sure we check because it's even root, right? So you plug into original. So you want to check 2 times 6 minus 3. Is that same thing as 3 minus 6? We are checking. 2 times 6, 12 minus 3, 9. Square root of 9 is what? 3. Here will be 3 minus 6, negative 3. They are not the same. So this answer is what? Extraneous. So we cannot use that. How about this one? Sometimes both will not work, maybe. Okay, you just have to check to see whether or not you have answers. So this one, you plug in 2 times 2 minus 3. Is that same thing as 3 minus 2? Right, plugging in to there. So this one is 4 minus 3 is 1. Square root of 1 is 1. 3 minus 2 is 1. Yes. So you can circle this answer. Right? So if I talk too fast for your learning, then you need to slow down and go back to listen to your video again. Okay? In class, we talk much slower because we let you to think about it, then get your feedback at the same time. And if you have questions, we can clarify. However, here, we just run straight through, but you do need to think about it before you move to next step. Okay? So far, we just have one radical in the equation. So that's how you do. Get a radical by itself. You take the power, then become what? A quadratic equation or a linear equation. Then you solve your normal way, then you check. Right? But your homework will have a situation like this. Okay? It will not be on your test, but if you go to higher trainings like pre-cal, calculus, you need to have those skills, okay? But not for our algebra class. So, but you do have homework to practice. For some of you, you actually need it later. So, you have two radicals. It's not that straightforward, okay? So we at least will show you once. So you cannot get radicals by itself because you have two of them, right? If you move one side, it will still not work. So because when you take a square, both sides, you can only get rid of one of them at a time. Okay, let's see why. So if by itself, you can cancel out, right? This side, you have two terms. When you multiply, you will have trinomial. You cannot just get rid of it, okay? So you will have what? This multiply itself twice. right? So for the first one, you have to do it one at a time. So for the first one, that will be the first time first, right? Then you will have this one times this one will be what? Plus 1 times this would be negative 3x plus 16, right? Then you do the lower rainbow. So this one times this one, you have another negative 3x plus 16, right? Then last one, so plus 1. So when you multiply them, first one, your radical will be gone because you have two things identical, plus 16, right? Then this one, the radical will not go away. You have two of them. That will be the case, right? Plus 1. So for the left-hand side, you multiply them out is this. So from here, you have this. Then on the right-hand side, radical will go away like this, right? So when you have two radicals, when you take a square on the both sides, you can only get rid of one of them. You only get rid of one of them at a time. Okay? So what do we have here? We have negative 3x, 16, and 1. So you have negative 3x plus 17 plus 2, 3x plus 16, right? One of the problems, if you do one of those problems, will take you a while to do it. Okay? Right? Now we only have one radical left. Then we'll get by itself. Okay? So you have to do it twice. So here minus 17 plus 3x minus 17. Then what do we have? Cancel out. We have 2 and negative 3x plus 16 equals what? Negative x plus 8. Is that right? Okay, let's continue, see if we have any typos. Then what? Then we multiply them twice again, right? Take a square. So 2 square is 4, then this square is what? Itself, right? Then this one is trinomial. X squared you have to FOIL. Minus 16x plus 64. Okay? Then let's see. We have negative 12x plus 64 equals x squared minus 16x plus 64. Right? Move everything to one side by add the opposite plus 12x minus 64. Right? Those cancel out. 0 equals x squared minus 4x. Right? Then x take out GCF minus x equals 0. Right? Then what do we have? Two sides. Then by 0 property, x is 0 or x minus 4 is 0. Right? Then this one, we have what? X. This one, x would be what? Equals 4. Then you have to plug into original, see if you can circle the answer. So you plug in and check. Make sure it's working before you circle the answer. Right? So, if you have two radicals, then you have to do it twice to get rid of all the radical symbols before you can solve the equations. Okay? One problem would take you a long time. So, all right. So that will be our section 9.6, solving radical equations.